Good evening, everyone. This is Julie Lytle, the Executive Director of Province 1. I'm glad to welcome you to the monthly gathering of Deacons Talking. Tonight we have the good fortune of being with Thomas Mariconda. Mariconda. I practiced that all week and I'm still fumbling over it.
That's all right.
What we thought we'd do to start is to share a prayer together. Tom has selected for us a new serenity prayer that I'm going to share on the screen. And we're going to say that together, and then we'll be able to go into introductions and share the rest of tonight's presentation. So if you could take a moment and gather yourself, and please pray with me. God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, which is pretty much everyone. Since I'm not you, God, at least not the last time I checked. And while you're at it, God, please give me the courage to change what I need to change about myself, which is, frankly, a lot. Since, once again, I'm not you, which means I'm not perfect. It is better for me to focus on changing myself than to worry about changing other people who, as you'll no doubt remember me saying, I can't change anyway. Finally, give me the wisdom to just shut up whenever I think that I'm clearly smarter than everyone else in the room, that no one else knows what they're talking about except me, or that I alone have all of the answers. Basically, God, grant me the wisdom to remember that I'm not you. Amen.
Amen. I really, let me give you a little introduction to, I chose this prayer because I think one of the many lessons that I learned in my ministry as a regional deacon is to always try to remember to not to take myself too seriously. With that being said, I'm really glad that we shared this new serenity prayer. And because I think it helps, something in it speaks to me about truth, about myself, and also the importance to always maintain a good and prayerful sense of humor in any ministry.
Well,
I hope you enjoyed that.
I certainly did, Tom. It is a great reminder. But in all seriousness, you do have an awful lot of experience to offer, and that's the wisdom that we're grateful that you'll be able to share. By way of introduction, Deacon Tom is the regional deacon for the Naugatuck Valley, covering the towns from Naugatuck to Shelton. He is with the Episcopal Church in Connecticut and serves at St. Michael's in Naugatuck, as well as Trinity Episcopal Church in Seymour. He was ordained as a deacon in 2011 and served 4 years at Trinity Episcopal Church in Newtown. He was serving there at the time of the Sandy Hook tragedy. He spent 30 years working in business and supply chain before he retired in 2014 to dedicate more time to his ministry. Tom's currently serving as the vice chair of the Naugatuck Valley Interfaith Council, is a member of the Seymour Oxford Food Pantry Board of Directors, the Valley Food Resource Task Force, the Naugatuck Social Services Network, and he serves on the Advanced Care Directive Team at Griffith Hospital. Tom, we're really glad again to have you with us to share about your regional ministry, and I'm going to let you share the rest of the introduction of what that all means.
Thank you very much. I have to admit, I've never done a webinar, I've done presentations, so this is an interesting format for me. But basically, I had served 4 years at Trinity Episcopal Church in Newtown, Connecticut, and I was there at the time of the Sandy Hook tragedy. And at the end of 4 years, I told my bishop that it was time for me really to get back into a ministry that was closer to my heart in terms of what I wanted to do as a deacon. And so I asked her that I wanted to be a regional deacon. There was no model for it. This was not something that they had in terms of this magnitude, the bishop had tried a regional deacon in terms of the city of New Haven, working very closely with one city. But this was the first time that we were looking at a 7-town region and trying to work with not just the Episcopal faith communities, but really seeing the deacon as being the deacon for the community. You know, in my conversation with the bishop, it was very clear, and I always will love Bishop Laura Ahrens for this. She was very clear what the ministry was not to be, and no direction on what it was to be. What she was very clear on is that this new ministry was not to be a traditional parish deacon, but rather a ministry focused primarily to the 7 towns of the Naugatuck Valley, going from Naugatuck to Shelton. As you see on your screen right now, you're getting sort of a snapshot of where our 7 towns are. And it goes from the north to Naugatuck down through Shelton. And this is a very diverse region with each town very unique in many ways from the others. Oxford is an up-and-coming affluent community that's still and very rural, but it is, the income levels are rising, so it's considered more of a affluent community. Shelton is considered much more affluent. Derby is an old mill town that's struggling with all sorts of economic issues. And Sonia is one of the poorest communities in the valley. Seymour is an old mill town, but it's a mixture between the old mill town and the affluence. And Beacon Falls is really sort of in its own, a very insular community, but with a great deal of poverty and issues there. So basically, this was the region that when Bishop Laura set this up, said this would be the region I would cover. And, you know, at first glance, it seems like it's a huge geographical area to cover. And so in my mind was, how can I be a regional deacon and work with 7 towns, not even 7 Episcopal churches, but just working with every faith community in there, working with the different agencies. And also, as you look at the picture on your screen, the Naugatuck Valley is divided in terms of the social service providers. So we constantly have this silo between the lower Naugatuck Valley, which is Oxford down south, but then Naugatuck and Beacon Falls are in their own area. And so many times what I found myself having to do is duplicate my relationship with social service providers, because there is no one social service provider or network that covers all 7 towns. It's a region of basically, you know, and when this was set up, the bishop gave me 2 primary tasks. I was to focus on food insecurity and homelessness and any other related issues as they arose. The only guidance that the bishop gave me when I started this in 2015 was be willing to try it on. There were no guarantees of any success, but just be willing to try anything on. And in many ways, there was no roadmap. There was no clear destination other than to be an advocate and a bridge between the church and the world. As you saw earlier, in terms of the number of towns, the Naugatuck Valley covers those 7 towns with a population of about 139,000 people. Approximately, as I was telling Julie earlier, 40% of that population earns under $40,000 annually, and which is not even considered a living wage in this particular region. So that sort of sets the tone of what we're struggling with. We struggle with food insecurity and its impact on education. And because it just became very clear that if children are not really given nutritious food, it starts to impact them all along the way. And then it's very hard to recover as they move through school. And basically, this region of 139,000 people, there's only several Episcopal churches, but it's a very faith-filled area, but it's very many different Christian faiths, and also we have a Buddhist temple. We're getting a mosque, hopefully in the future, and it is a region that I had to learn to really get out of the silo of seeing myself as the Episcopal deacon and really transitioning myself to being seen as the deacon for the valley, which has taken a lot of work and trust and building. Right now, I'm currently partnering with 2 Episcopal clergy, and they themselves see my role, or the role of this regional deacon, as one of working with the wider community rather than spending much time working even with their own faith community. Originally, this ministry was designed to be working with 3 parishes, and it was reduced to 2 because basically what we found is that it was hard for me to really focus on all the other faith communities in the valley. And the bishop and I wanted more time so that I could work with and partner with the various other faith communities, whether they be Methodist or Congregational, Evangelical. And so that sort of sets the tone for the brief description. What I'd like to do is offer or ask if there's any questions.
So it's obvious that you're trying to do an interfaith effort and that it's kind of a wide open palette for you to be able to start painting with. And
Yeah.
that can be both, I'm sure, exciting and daunting as you're starting a ministry. Were there some strategies for how you could introduce yourself to these people and start developing the relationships so that you could make the networks possible?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I started with some low-key things. I did, anyone who's ever been in sales will tell you that the most horrible thing is the cold call, when you just, and what I decided to do was I walked into the United Way office, cold call, introduced myself, and basically said, how can I partner with you? And then from there, and again, it all depends upon the person you're working with. They were very receptive because Naugatuck as a community has always felt sort of left behind many of the other parts of the town. So they just saw a live body that said, I'm here. And, they said, please join our network. But basically, most of it, the strategy is be willing to let go of the things you're afraid of. And you got to put yourself out there and just have trust and be honest.
So in your situation, it's sounding like there was already some basis of a network through United Way that you were able to then partner with. You didn't have to start knocking on the doors of individuals for each of the different faith groups to find a way to partner.
No, my main work has been, how do I get plugged into the existing networks? And then to work with those networks to help them think outside the box. And what else can we do? But primarily, the biggest thing I did is what I discovered initially on many of these social service networks, faith communities were not seen as partners.
Mm.
Faith communities were seen as operating in their own world, primarily with this illusion of evangelical that, are you saved? And
So
instead
there
of
was fear about the
fear,
proselytizing side of things?
yes. And one of the biggest things, and I made a point that when I do most of these networks, I wear my collar as a deacon because number one, I'm trying to really break down some of the barriers that exist with the agencies that have not seen faith communities as partners to solving problems. And that we need, if we're going to be doing things on a community basis, you can't exclude such a large part of each community, which is your faith community. And faith communities are composed of people in the community who care about where they live and the folks.
So I'm getting the impression that there were basically silos of the secular
Yeah.
organizations doing things and the faith communities doing things. What did you see as the greatest support for being able to get them talking to each other and to be able to break down those pre-impressions that were creating the barriers?
Well, one of the biggest thing is like, the social service providers would all work and communicate with each other. And what I'm saying is that there were and are many faith-based activities going on, which were not considered part of the network. And so my thing is that we're already addressing some of the same things that you're trying to address. Why are we duplicating? Why don't we work together? And also start to form partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
So that St. Michael's, for example, in Naugatuck, was very open to being a real partner in the community. So more and more, I was able to get the United Way and the network to start seeing St. Mike, to use the facilities of St. Michael's. For example, each year in Naugatuck, we go out at the summer, and the network goes out to try to make sure everyone knows about the summer school lunch program. And what we did is we started using the St. Michael's facilities as a place to bring the community together. So it's that kind of partnership that I think really what this role does, it's not like I'm really doing direct ministry, but what I'm doing is facilitating and pulling people together to engage in conversation. I actually don't want to be part of many of the conversations because I don't need to be.
So my job description as the executive director for Province 1 says that I'm supposed to be the initiator of connections. And I just love that description because what it does, and it sounds like this is what you're doing, is that I know and meet lots of people doing wonderful things. And as I see needs that would benefit from knowing somebody who has resources, or where I see people that are doing similar things that might like to work together, I'm bringing them together. So it's mainly a communications function so that it can then grow and expand however they choose it to be as I step back. Is that basically what I'm hearing you say you do?
Yeah, and it's also, it goes in the other way, like the rector of St. Michael's, we had conversation after conversation that the people who are coming to our community meal, which we do once a month, they were asking for diapers. There was a real need. I mean, all too often, diaper need goes right over the top. People don't even think. And that initiated a conversation of me starting to talk to people in the network to say, do we have a diaper bank? And the answer was no. So then why not? And then, so it's this sort of cross-fertilization whereby the church should always be the first line of defense. And they're sometimes very aware of the needs of the community if the church is really grounded in its community.
Mm-hmm.
And that, this is not just something the church is bringing here because they want to see a diaper bank. There's a need for diaper bank services. So then from there, I got the network thinking about that. Then I was able to facilitate a partnership with a diaper bank in another town. So now we have this, again, partnership forming between the diaper bank and our social service providers. And we had one of the social service agencies step up and say they'll take care of it. So again, that role, my role is sort of, yeah, there's a need here. And if we can get out of our silos, what can we do together?
Great.
And again, it's partnership with the church.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, that's what God's mission. It's not really about it is evangelization if we understand evangelization in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
Evangelizing about our faith, that our faith has made a difference in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the greatest evangelization, that we're doing what we're doing because we've been transformed.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your question, Julie.
Oh, definitely. Thank you.
Does Matt have any questions, or no, he's still on mute?
Go ahead.
All right. You know, this ministry for me, and a very important part of my own spirituality, is that it has been grounded and rooted in the spirituality of St. Francis. And for me, the regional ministry was a logical and comfortable fit to my vocation as a member of the Episcopal Third Order of St. Francis. You know, St. Francis lived as an itinerant preacher, and he insisted that the friars, the brothers, the frater, that they not grow roots. And I think that's very important. And I know there's a classic tug of war with some deacons getting attached to their communities. But I've always said, and that's why I think I'm so attracted to the Franciscan model, deacons should never grow roots. Deacons are not called to communities. Deacons are called to the greater church and to lead and to enable and empower others. But where we are, we're only icons. We're not to grow roots or get attached. We should be almost invisible in many ways. And so what I find is what I love about Francis is that Francis lived as this itinerant preacher, and that's the model I do in terms of my Sunday service, which is that I move around from church to church to church every Sunday, not really having any one place that I can call home. Some of the places may only see me once a month. And that requires a certain, you have to be comfortable with that, because you don't have from any one community at any one time this sense of being grounded. What grounds you is being grounded in faith. And that's where I attribute having a rule of life as a Franciscan that truly grounds me in prayer because of the nature of the Franciscan rule. And, you know, and basically Francis and deacons should not grow roots. We're not to be monks in a monastery, but Francis said the world should be our cloister. That's where we belong. And really, that's the vocation that we're really trying to emulate for all of God's people, that the world is our cloister. It's not the church building. It is the world. It is when we leave. I mean, that's why the diaconal dismissal is probably one of the most critical and pivotal things. You are dismissing God's people to go back into the world. They've heard the word. Now get the hell out of here and
go do it.
Go do it. But it's a different approach. But I do like it. But at the same time, it does require a certain amount of comfortableness with this itinerant. I say have garment bag will travel, because I have to take my vestments with me, because I'm always moving. And even on like Christmas and Easter, it's like the struggle. Where am I going to be? What service? Because you really don't have a place to lay your head. And that's okay, because that's what Jesus called us to. Any questions on that portion or thoughts? Because I wanted to open up the questions.
Well, that whole sense of itinerancy is a different type of a model for our faith communities. I think we've heard Jesus sent them 2 by 2, but we really haven't thought much about what happens when they're moving from place to place and how that shifts from being a community where everyone gathers to being more out in the world.
Yes.
And it seems to me that that's the model that a lot of churches are now coming to wrestle with. We're aware of the fact that a lot of people in the world today don't really have a sense of church or what happens inside the church buildings. And so to move outside and be invitational, to be able to show that we're living our faith in an expressive way, which has always been a part of the church, but has not always been as visible, is becoming much more of a part of the outreach. Is that more or less what you mean when you're talking about the world as our cloister? Is to get outside of the building and to be engaged in a visible way?
Yes, to really to get totally outside the brick and mortar, which in and of itself is beautiful and has history. But so much today will not, or just don't find that brick and mortar structure meets the needs. And I think the church is called to go, and Francis went from the top to the bottom. Francis always believed that deacons in the church was called to reach out to the margins, to stay within the structure of the church, as I think the deacons are, but to call the people of God to really that we need to leave our comfort zone and reach out to those on the margins.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that reaching out to the margins is where we come to experience the face of Christ. I've always said to people that, in my preaching, if you're standing on the top of a mountain looking down at the people of God, it's hard to discover the face of Christ unless you get in the trench right next to someone and you look into their eyes. And it's only in that experience of looking into the face of the other to discover that there is no other. There is only Christ, and ultimately only you. Now, I just probably went off on a tangent on my Franciscan spirituality.
But I think there's a piece with the understanding of the evangelism that we need to do that sometimes forgets the formation that also is a part of it. So there's this yin and yang that I think needs to happen, where you have the cloister, you have the church, you have a gathered community where we are formed and fashioned, where we come to know about that relationship and are fed in our community life to be able to then leave and share that in a way that the world can also be fed. And if we don't have a grounding, we oftentimes are inviting people to something that has no there.
Exactly.
And so I'm curious where you find the feeding that you need when you're doing this itinerant work.
The feeding actually for me, because I am part of the Third Order, first and foremost, I find it is in my rule of life, which as a member of the Third Order, but also as a member of the order, it is through Franciscan fellowship, which really grounds me. I will be the first to say that the downside of this ministry is really grounding, because you're not really in any one community to really develop. I mean, you do develop relationships, and I've gotten to know my folks, but you're not there in that same intimate relationship that you would have as if you were a parish deacon. And you really are moving along every month. You're on this rota. So it is, for me, it's been Franciscan fellowship, but I definitely would say this kind of ministry requires that you have some community, whatever shape that takes. And you also be firmly rooted in a prayer life, again, however you define that, because you need to be grounded in either contemplation, meditation, some kind of grounding prayer activity. Otherwise, none of what you're doing makes sense.
Mm. So for those people that might be watching the recording of this that don't know what a rule of life or a cloister is, you've just described some of it, but are there things you would add to that to be able to fill out what a third order community is and how that connects with a grounding for you?
Yeah, I mean, a third order community is we all do our own thing. We all have our own ministry, but we gather. I'm actually a part of a couple of different communities. One is an online community in which we use Zoom, in which we do Bible study online, which is great, and Lectio Divina, and just share where we are. Also, as we come with different issues going on in our life, just share different ministries and, just being supportive. But the great opportunity is just to be able to talk about our faith journey.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes and I will say this, that sometimes we may not always get it in a more brick and mortar established Sunday community, but whatever, all of us need some kind of true Christian community. At least that's what I have found, that helps us to be grounded in which we could share our story.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the rule of life. It is the meditation, but it's Christian community, I think, and I mean that in its broadest terms. So it doesn't have to be or just mean your worshiping community. You could have Christian community in any variety of contexts. Does that help, Julie?
Very much. Thank you.
And so basically, so the Franciscan spirituality truly grounds me in this. But then I thought I'd go over, right now, as I had mentioned, I serve 2 Episcopal parishes. It was originally 3, but that got to be a bit much. And it's one of the hard things is, I have to admit, it may sound funny, but I can't sometimes remember how the priest likes things, no matter how many times, because I'm only there once a month. So you eventually just say whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the hardest thing is I can't always remember names because I see some of these folks only once a month and I'm trying to scratch my head, so you have to learn to laugh at that, and not to get too upset with yourself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
This regional ministry and being itinerant, you have to learn to be very patient with yourself because you don't get the same kind of connections. But on the other hand, what this ministry does in terms of the relationship between the deacon and whether they be a priest in charge or a rector or whatever, is, many times there's the dynamic of what is the relationship between the priest and the deacon and trying to come to some working agreement within the parish context. This is the first time in this regional ministry, because my ministry is really so much outside of the parish and directly to the community, that what I see has happened in my area is that my relationship with my 2 clergy right now has been one more of colleague, mm-hmm. rather than working for someone. We share ideas. We talk about what are the needs of the community, but it's not like in the same context. So that, so there's again a bit of uncomfortableness initially, because you've got to be very comfortable in your skin to do mm-hmm. this, because you can't like go to someone and ask for permission. You really come back with ideas based upon the needs of the community, and then say, is this something you would like your community or this community to partake in? That's a different kind of question than asking permission. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but and basically, so I'm serving right now 2 Episcopal parishes, but because of the nature of this ministry, it has given me opportunities to go and preach and visit other faith communities. And I remember the day, about a year ago, I was invited to preach at the Methodist Church on diaper need. And I'm going to myself, I've never had children. And so I'm doing a homily on diaper need. And then I'm saying, I have no clue what they do at a Methodist service. But the goal and again, the welcoming that here you are, an Episcopal deacon, they see you as their to be welcomed into another faith community and be seen as their regional deacon, I think talks with this model. It opens up and it breaks down so many silos.
Mm-hmm.
Because and especially what I've tried to make the impression with folks in my ministry, I'm less seen as Tom, the Episcopal deacon, as Tom, the regional deacon for the Naugatuck Valley, who happens to be Episcopalian.
Mm-hmm.
And I know sometimes there's a nuance, but I think that changes how people perceive you. Now, it doesn't need, and I think because of the nature of this ministry covering 7 towns and multiple faith communities, I really need to be trusted. That I was not coming in with an agenda, if that makes sense, but was representing the valley as a whole. I've had opportunities, as I said, at the Methodist Church and various other faith communities. The local Congregational Church has asked me to come down and preach in the spring on Franciscan Spirituality. So again, it's I'm definitely tied to my 2 Episcopal parishes, but I'm also very, very moving in and out of other faith communities as well. Now, with this ministry, as we all know, deacons are time is important in terms of that I really have to watch how much time, because this ministry could be a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I need to do, in any deacon who would do this, you really have to learn the fine art of prioritizing, which I still have not been able to get 100%. Talking about the huge sucking vacuum, it's like there's so much need. And it's just learning to how can we prioritize that. And actually, that's where my rule of life has a large segment, because the rule of life really tries to always remind me that I need to start each day with prayer and contemplation. Otherwise, nothing I do makes sense. Any questions on this part, on the...
Well, you've offered a couple of different layers to explore. And I'm curious if we can focus on the interfaith context for a minute. Being able to cross different denominational lines really does, as you said, require a lot of trust. And to be invited into the pulpit in another tradition is an incredible privilege. So I'm curious how you got from Tom talking about diaper ministry to being able to find a way to show the respect that's due to the other traditions, to have those kinds of invitation happen. How do you get your foot in the door for somebody who's trying to replicate this kind of work?
The thing that I really got involved in right from the start was the local clergy groups. To start developing relationships, not as Tom the deacon trying to get something from them, but as clergy partners, getting to know. And sometimes it took, just going every month and a lot of it really was not anything that I may have been that interested in, because a lot of it is about parish life, but listening and talking. But more than anything else, it's developing relationships with each of the clergy folk and just getting them to know you and know your passions. And of course, all through this time, they started to see that if there was a cause and I was passionate about it, I was like a dog with a bone. But it was about trust. And I could not have been invited into these faith communities if I wasn't a member of the clergy group, and also be willing to, when they were doing like a Thanksgiving service and they wanted, as many clergy as possible, it meant showing up and saying that I cared what they were doing, that I was just interested in diaper drives, if that makes sense.
Completely.
It's I do that. I respect my colleagues and I have gotten to know them, and I've tried to support them in whatever way I can. And they, in turn, when I come up with an idea, they don't automatically shut me out. They don't say yes all the time, but, they know that for every idea they shoot down, I'll come back with another one until something sticks to the wall. I just like to throw stuff at the wall.
That's a helpful technique sometimes. What sticks really is a sign of things needing to be moved. Which moves me to the other side of the question of what you were talking about. I'm sure with your conversations and the relationships you've developed with the United Way, with other social service agencies, with the secular world, as well as with the churches and interfaith groups that you're working with, the list of possibilities grows quite large. And I'm wondering how you strategize. Do you have a team of people, or are you doing it by yourself? How do you come up with what are the priorities that you're going to focus on in a given period of time, whether it's for a short-term or a longer-term venture?
Well, what I do is first of all, I've developed a close relationship with one of the executive directors of the United Way. So I will have conversations with her about what's feasible. But also what I do is I try to listen to what's going on in the network, hear what's really on the hearts of the social service providers. And then I will use my two clergy partners as partners to say, I hear this concern. What do you think? Or what is your sense? And to start having a dialogue. Is this something that you can see in this community? Because again, more so than me, because I'm trying to cover 7 communities, you really need the feet on the ground, which is your rectors and priests in charge who should know their community. More than me, because I'm trying to do it like at 5,000 feet covering 7 towns. So, but I definitely use the 2 priests that I work with. I also use my United Way contacts. I've developed a good relationship with the president of the anti-poverty agency in the Valley. And so I'll chat with him about needs. So what I try to do is I don't believe you can do this ministry as a lone ranger. You really need to go out. And I got this idea. What do you think about it? And start bouncing it. You always need to be collegial about that. I don't know if that answers.
Great. That's great. Thank you.
So having relationships that you can chat with folks, and then your chatting, I think, leads to some excitement.
Lots of excitement.
Now, again, we went over, I started alluding, one of the issues with this ministry was the fact that even though it's 7 towns, it is divided into 2 service areas. So I had to, in some ways, not just develop a relationship with one group of people, but I had to develop relationships with multiple agencies. So there was the Naugatuck Social Service Network, but that only covered 2 towns. Then I had to get involved with the United Way. And part of this relationship is it first started with just involvement with the Naugatuck United Way. But then on the lower end of the valley, I got involved with the Lower Valley United Way, became part of the Food Resource Task Force, which is really a model for what we're trying to do in the state of Connecticut now, because we're trying to pull all the food banks in the valley to come together and sit at the table and to talk about best practices. But again, each organization, in some ways, what I tried to do with each organization is network within each group that I became a member of to try to see how I could take this group as a way to connect with another group and develop relationships with each of the groups. And it's the word relationship and trust that I think really is the foundation of this ministry. But also a willingness for me not to live in a silo, which is not to live not just within the silo of that agency, but always looking at the interconnecting circles to what that agency or group was attached to, and how could I get involved with that group to further my ministry. So in a sense, what I needed to do, and we joke about it, but constantly network with every group, within a group network, get to know the folks involved, get to know what they're involved in. And then, sometimes it leads to doors opening up and it gets you more involved. So it's the kind of thing that, as I see it, regional deacon really meant having an ability and an openness to living in this liminal space where you just have to be yourself, but be honest, but keep networking, keep building relationships of trust. So I don't know if that's basically, it's like, it wasn't like there was a clear path, Julie, with this. Rather, what it was getting involved with one group, getting to know them, then trying to see, okay, that's a group that makes sense to try to get involved with and see how it interconnects, and then trying to get involved. So that led me, by the time I was all through, just to give you an idea of like the spokes of a wheel, it started with Naugatuck Social Services Network and the United Way of Naugatuck and Beacon Falls. That led to the United Way of the Lower Valley, Naugatuck Partnership for Children, the Team Diaper Bank. Team is the anti-poverty agency. The Valley Diaper Bank, the Naugatuck Clergy Group, Seymour Oxford Clergy Group, Seymour Oxford Food Pantry Board, Food Resource Task Force, and the Naugatuck Valley Interfaith Council. And they all came out of initially one contact. But it's that and I'm not going to say it's my gift, but it's just the almost and inherent, you have to be willing to network, moving in ever widening circles. Otherwise, what I found would happen, you start to put yourself in silos. And the nature of this ministry is you really almost can't get attached to any one agency, just like I couldn't get attached to a faith community. I need to be looking at 7 towns and being a deacon for 139,000 people, if that makes any.
Tons of sense. You've talked about the challenge of making a cold call. And it sounds like, at least in a lot of your initial experiences, you were well welcomed. And so the door was open and it felt good. Have you had experiences of closed doors and ways to help people that don't have as much initial success to feel like they should and can persevere and find ways to do what they're feeling called to do, even if it means a slightly longer trip around the back door?
Yeah. Well, and I think the nature of this is that the cold call is not always going to work. You really don't know. And I really believe that if and I'm not going to take the standard line that God's going to open the door, but I do believe that the doors and windows will open. But there were times in this where I was reaching out to some of the agencies where it just did not go well. And, you don't take that too seriously. And you don't take it personally, because what you focus on is the relationships you have. And it could be that the gifts you're bringing or what you're passionate about is not what that agency needs, or maybe not at the time that you're there. And so the only thing I would say is that, in this ministry, you accept the disappointments and move on, just like Jesus said, shake the dust off your feet and just move, and it's also like you have to be willing to accept disappointment. The United Way and I spent a lot of time thinking there was a great need to let the community know about 211. 211 is the way that you get access to a lot of services here in Connecticut. And so we planned this really great community forum. Nobody signed up in advance. So now the United Way and I, we were both on the same page, and she said to me, I thought this was a great idea. And I said, well, so did I, but apparently it wasn't. And what you do with that disappointment, just like with a cold call that doesn't go well or won't see you, you just let it go. Mm-hmm. And, you can get very frustrated in this, because I was fortunate because of some of the partners and even some of the agencies I work with outside of the Naugatuck area. Sometimes they're not the easiest to work with, and they still don't know how to figure me out because I'm not siloed. And this is another thing that's a challenge. You're not coming from an agency. You're not really attached to any specific, I am Episcopalian, but you're not like, they can't put you in a box. Mm-hmm. And so I think the nature of the regional deacon is that even they struggle with trying to figure it out. They know you're Episcopal, and that's about all they can grasp. But otherwise, because this is not a model that they're used to. Right. And also someone who's was given this basically job description, if you want to call it that, is to purely advocate for the needs of the community, regardless of agency. So when I do things, sometimes, agencies may say, he's a little pushy. Well, I'm pushy because I'm here to be an advocate. And that can be difficult. But that's in a sense my job description. That's what the bishop asked me to be, to advocate for home, on the issue of food insecurity and other issues. But even that, you realize you're not there. You're there to do God's mission and to advocate for all folks in need. Does that answer or?
Mm-hmm. So I usually like somewhere in the conversation with deacons when we're doing Deacons Talking on the Road to Emmaus to ask, what was it that convinced you that this was the call that you needed to answer? Especially when it is so unconventional compared to what traditional diaconal ministry in a parish looks like. What was it that made you say yes, that this is what God was asking of you at this point in time in your life?
Well, there were days I remember after I went to the bishop and we talked about this, and then I said, I don't have a clue how to do this. I'm not from Naugatuck. I've never lived in the valley. I mean, I live in Shelton, which is the last town in the valley. So at least I could say I'm a valley boy, so that gets me.
Street cred.
Yeah. But I think it was truly, and I know for me at least, and everyone's response to this call is going to be different, but mine was truly rooted, I think, in Franciscan spirituality, to call in the margin, that to go in that I felt, and I told the bishop this, I just felt this call to do something totally different, totally outside the box, totally out of my comfort zone. And I think that that's what I think Francis really tried to model, is that we need to go for the margins. We need to do what they, the downward mobility, and at those in need, and truly being advocates for them. So for me, it was, after we spoke, I remember saying, I must be out of my mind to be asking. And when she said to me, the only thing I can tell you is what it won't be, and then I said, I'm really in trouble. Really, because you think about it, because normally, there's some kind of parameters you're given to work ministry around. Here, that only guidelines is what it is not to be. And as easy as that sounds, that's also uncomfortable. Because you really, sometimes I think we all like to be told what to do, and, at least to start with. But here it's like, you've got to make this. You've got to go where the Spirit is calling you. It really was like the early disciples and Paul just going off, as we read in Paul's letter.
Faith and trust.
Yes. So I hope that answers that.
Definitely.
I would recommend this type of ministry more because, one of the things that I found so moving in this is the ability to work with small churches who sometimes become so looking in on themselves and how small they are and thinking they can't do anything. Well, if you take and you start collaborating and modeling collaboration, small churches working together can do a great deal. And one example I have to share is, the first year I was doing this, we decided to do a 7-town diaper drive, which is all these little churches in 1 week. And it was on National Need Diapers Awareness Week. We raised over 15,000 diapers and 10,000 baby wipes. And it wasn't any one church. But it was all little faith communities that were responding to God's mission. And that's a model, I think, small communities should never worry about size. I mean, yes, there's a reason they want to worry about size, but I don't think God's calling us to worry about size and doing mission. We should not let our size discourage us from reaching out to the community, because we can do a lot more simply by collaborating together. And I think small churches can have a major impact. Almost all the churches I work with are small. They're small but faithful. Some are a little bit larger, but there's so much we can do with small communities. I've encouraged some of my small communities to adopt a social worker and doing things in their own local context. So again, mission doesn't always mean you have to leave your faith community. You can still do mission, and I'm a true believer. Not every community is going to want to leave their context. So you do ministry in local context, but you can still impact the community in local context. I would prefer if they would go out. But some communities, you're just not going to get them out of the home turf, and maybe eventually, but that's not important. What's important is that they want to respond to
Mm-hmm.
you. And if it means doing it in local context, you do it in local context. At least that's so. Any other questions for me on that? Or
No, that
thoughts?
sounds great. You've given us a lot to think about in terms of a regional ministry and how to motivate and inspire people on all sides trying to move toward a common direction of serving God's people.
Yeah, and I think that that's what this is about, and it's really listening. As you're part of these meetings, the meetings I'm in, like one of the things we talked about, Naugatuck Beacon Falls had no listing of all the food resources. Everyone had a piece, but there was nowhere you could go for a listing of all the food resources. So I kept listening to this and saying, well, why don't we do a food resource document? So it's the second year. Now, again, my role was to help maybe push it along, but it was only trying to push the cats to the end. It wasn't to do it. And now, in our second year, the community has even updated itself. And again, that's the success story. The things that the deacons can do in the community. There are so many success stories just by being present, because we're not coming from any agency. So we almost become a neutral party and someone that can speak without an agenda. And that's the role that I've tried to play. When I advocate, again, I'm not advocating as coming from any agency. So I'm not worried about funding. I'm not worrying about silos. I'm just speaking, I hear this need, and how can we address it together? And that's really what the regional ministry is about. And of course, engaging with our faith communities and trying to engage folks to model that as well, by trying to get them to really be comfortable with becoming part of these agencies and social service networks.
Wonderful.
All right?
Mm-hmm.
How's that?
Perfect.
Would we like to end?
So let me share with folks that Deacons Talking is what we've been a part of for this past hour with Tom. It is an idea that grew out of the biennial New England Deacons Conference. Every other year, the deacons in New England come together for an engagement with a theme or a topic. And the folks that were part of the planning team really felt like waiting for 2 years for the community of deacons to be talking with one another really was too long. And so this idea of Deacons Talking on the Road to Emmaus came up. It's inspired by the story of Cleopas and the other disciple who were on the road to Emmaus. And were talking with a stranger who turned out to be Jesus in their midst. That presence of Jesus, when they were not aware, let them release all that was happening, their fear and grief, their joy and celebration, so that they could reclaim their ministry in a new way with a lot of confidence. We host these conversations on the third Thursday of every month, starting at 7 p.m. There's a registration on the Province One website. That's at province1.org, province1.org. This registration link will send you all of the information you need to know what the electronic connections are to come into Zoom and to be a part of our conversation. We also have the good fortune of being able to record these programs, and that resource is available through the Deacons page. I'll show you real quick if it will respond. The Diaconal Ministry allows us to have a place here where in our video archive, you can find a copy of all of the different programs that have been hosted over the past year. This story tonight will be listed probably within the next week or two. So we'd love to have you join a future conversation and to be able to share your story with us so that we can be inspired, as we have by Tom's story tonight, of ways that we can think about doing ministry together. I know for us to close, Tom asked us to share the Franciscan blessing together. So let me open that here on the screen.
Yep.
May God bless you with discomfort and easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and to turn their pain into joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. Tom, we thank you for sharing a bit of your foolishness with us, and we look forward to welcoming others next month at the December Deacons Talking, where we'll have Ellen, where did I write it down?
Ellen Adams.
Ellen Adams is going to be talking on December 21st at 7 p.m. She's going to share with us about how she can help support women who are coming out of prison and help them find housing. So please join us on December 21st and have a blessed holiday season.
Take care. Bye.